of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18th, 2025 and Thursday, December 11th, 2025, the committee is resuming its study of the Canada Infrastructure Bank's financing of new vessels for British Columbia Ferry Services, Inc. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. First, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder, colleagues, that all comments should be addressed to the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience in this regard. Colleagues, I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for the first hour today. We have appearing before us the Honourable Gary Anandasangri, Minister of Public Security. Welcome to you, sir. As well as officials accompanying the Minister today from the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, we have Mr. Richard Bilodeau, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, National and Cybersecurity Branch. Welcome. And from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, Vanessa Lloyd, Deputy Director. Welcome to all three of you. Minister, we will get right into it because I know that we're eager to ask you questions. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to you for 5-minute opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief in my opening remarks. I'll leave enough time for questions. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Merci, Monsieur le Président et membres de comité.
Thank you, members of the committee, for inviting me here today.
Colombians, especially in coastal communities, rely on ferries as modes of transportation for connection to the mainland. The decision by BC Ferries last year to procure its new ferries offshore was a decision made by the province after conducting their own due diligences to accommodate growing demand and need for service. The committee is understandably concerned about the implications of this deal on national security. While Public Safety Canada does have authority to conduct security reviews of foreign direct investments under the Investment Canada Act, it does not review procurement decisions at the provincial level, such as this one. Therefore, we would not have had the authority to conduct a national security review in this case. Only after outreach from Transport Canada did public safety officials engage with BC Ferries. BC Ferries had already made their procurement decision. Notre gouvernement entreprend actuellement plusieurs initiatives.
Our government is undertaking a number of initiatives to strengthen our economic and national security and sovereignty. This in the face of ever-changing and ever-increasing threats.
Continually examine how to protect and promote Canada's economic security. This includes expanding both domestic and international collaboration, as well as identifying key areas of engagement and focus. Maintaining and bolstering economic security is crucial to our growth and our sovereignty. This requires a whole-of-government approach across all levels of government, industry, Indigenous communities, and partners, academia, and international allies. Mr. Chair, once again, thank you for the invitation to appear at this committee. I welcome your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Albus. Mr. Albus, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister and officials, for the work you do for our country. Minister, is China your government's new strategic ally, or is China, as Canadian security agencies have repeatedly stated, the most sophisticated and active state cybersecurity threat to Canada today? It cannot be both, sir.
I believe the Prime Minister has said that we want to meet our trading partners where they're at, not where we would want them to be. With respect to the work of the Prime Minister, as you're aware, we're facing significant difficulties with our closest and best trading partner, the United States. We have embarked on an international effort to expand trade relations, including with China. And I would suggest that the work that the Prime Minister has done, including his upcoming visit to India, Australia, and Japan, is part of this broader narrative to expand our trade by 50% over the coming years, one that will ensure that our both economic security and jobs will be protected in Canada while we're going through some trade difficulties with our southern border.
Well, first of all, that makes no sense because we're talking about jobs being skipped over here in Canada for a Chinese hybrid shipyard. But, Minister, it sounds like you're saying, and again, I believe in being clear-eyed about these things, it sounds like you're saying national security interests should be subordinate to trade interests. Is that the case?
I believe you can do both. And what we've undertaken with China, and I can ask my officials to expand, is that we do have an agreement that speaks to issues around safety and security. We have an MOU that was signed, as you're aware, when the Prime Minister was in China last month. However, we're also working towards greater economic engagement. Similarly, we're doing that with India and many other countries. So we are, I believe that we are able to do both.
Minister,
and in fact, the moment calls us for us to do both.
You did mention officials, and I will say, in this unclassified document that this committee has received from Transport Canada, officials have said, Transport Canada warned of media reports of surveillance technology embedded in equipment, ports, cranes, and drones, raising concerns about hidden sensors and data harvesting technologies in foreign manufactured transportation assets. Given this, what specific national security assessment has public safety conducted to rule out embedded surveillance hardware or software in these ferries being built in China?
So as I indicated in my opening remarks, that there was no security assessment. This was outside of the scope of the work that our national security apparatus do. This was a procurement that was undertaken by BC Ferries in the province of British Columbia. And it is very much outside the scope of the work that we undertake.
Well, Minister, I got to say, the fact that no security review has been done is unfathomable to me. Transport Canada states plainly that Canada does not have comprehensive legislation to manage the risks identified on this file, and that existing oversight focuses only on performance and safety rather than mitigation of national security concerns. Example given, unauthorized data access or surveillance. Why would public safety permit foreign-built ferries to be imported before the government closes this legislative gap? What do you have to say, sir?
Mr. Alves, I don't want to demean your understanding of Canadian federalism, but let me take this moment to say that we are the federal government. This particular procurement was undertaken by the province, as you're aware, province of British Columbia. They have every authority to do that. They have their own laws and guidelines that they follow, and it is very much in that vein that this particular procurement was undertaken. So it does.
Security review by Public Safety Canada. Transport Canada says that we have legislative gaps that do not cover this kind of stuff. Minister, Transport Canada also warns that vessels built in China will have access to Canadian waterways and could gather information related to critical underwater infrastructure, as well as critical North American supply routes. Minister, what is public safety's threat assessment regarding foreign-built ferries mapping, scanning, or otherwise collecting intelligence on underwater cables or other important data infrastructure?
What I can say is that every vehicle, every vessel that comes here will have to meet Canadian standards.
But there's no review. You've said there's no review, sir.
Well, there are two different things, right?
There's a safety review by Transport Canada.
One are the safety, the safeguards that are in place, and in this particular case, the BC government procured these vessels.
So the BC government has the right to put our national security and the Canadians' own national security at risk. Is that what you're saying, sir?
What I'm saying is that they have the prerogative to undertake.
They have the prerogative.
They have the prerogative to undertake procurement according to their laws, according to their rules, and in this case, that is exactly what has happened. But what I can say is that vehicles, whether it be EV vehicles or those vessels that are being procured, still need to be in line with Canadian standards.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to take really a quick second here. So these vessels effectively have a 25% tariff. Your department is, CBSA, is I should say, the agency is supposed to collect those tariffs unless there's a remission order. Does the government plan on giving these foreign-built vessels a pass and effectively not just locking out Canadian workers, but actually making them cheaper for BC Ferries to bring in at the expense of our industries. What is your answer, sir?
Well, as you're aware, CBSA is an independent agency. They're not represented here in the panel today. If you would like further information, I would be more than glad to get that for you.
Thank you very much,
listed
both.
in the,
Thank you,
on the
Mr.
Customs
Albus,
Tariff
and
Act,
thank you very
specifically
much,
with that response.
Minister. We'll now turn our attention to Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. And Minister, thank you so much for joining us today, sir. As the Member of Parliament for Victoria, as you know, I represent constituents who rely on BC Ferries. This is critical infrastructure in our part of the country, necessary for daily life, for economic growth, for vitality, for all manner of services and connectivity throughout our province, and indeed the entire west coast of Canada. People in my community know firsthand that the aging of BC Ferries' fleet is creating real challenges and also is a drag on our economic productivity and the diversification of our economy on the West Coast. From our perspective, new ferries are necessary, and they really, to be honest, can't come quickly enough. In this vein, knowing as we do that the shipyard in China that has been selected by BC Ferries for the construction of these new vessels has also produced ferries that are in use by many of our allied countries, notably France and Denmark, as well as others. I'm wondering if we could just clarify the record and ask you a very direct question. Does Public Safety Canada have any reason to believe that this procurement of new vessels by BC Ferries poses a national security risk for this country?
Thank you for the question, and let me just comment at the outset on the need for increased ferry services in British Columbia. I've, tried to go to Victoria and Nanaimo from Vancouver on a number of occasions, and I've had difficulty sometimes attaining a ferry in a timely manner. Other modes of transportation, as you know, is weather dependent in many cases, and often we find ourselves washed out and not able to travel. So I do fully recognize the needs of your community, needs of British Columbians, as well as those in Victoria and Nanaimo and other major areas where these ferries will be utilized. Having said that, I think it's appropriate for our national security officials to answer the question vis-a-vis the vessel itself. So maybe we'll start with Ms. Lloyd and Mr. Bilodeau.
Thank you very much for the question through the chair. I'll start by perhaps offering to reassure the committee members that the national security community writ large, including CSIS, takes the ongoing investigation, monitoring, and where appropriate mitigation of threats seriously every single day. As the minister has said, in this case, the procurement of these vessels was not subject to a review. I think the committee would understand that given that there have been concerns raised by the former Minister of Transport that there could be national security concerns, that we are alert to that potential. And so I can explain to the committee what we do in those cases. We make sure that we are doing engagement to our stakeholders at the provincial and all levels of government, as well as to industry partners, and to make sure that going forward in the building and engagements under this contract, that those entities have the opportunity to engage, for example, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service to report any concerns that they have. I would also highlight, as the minister mentioned, connected vehicles. These ferries are not connected vehicles. So some of the concerns that the committee might have as with respect to data sovereignty or other concerns around EVs, to my current understanding, don't apply in this case, although I would defer to Transport Canada to speak specifically to the technology that is in these particular ferries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And the one thing I will add, just in terms of the toolkit, one of the bills that's before Parliament and committee right now is Bill C-8 that contains some provisions in Part 2 that would address critical cyber systems in federally regulated sectors, transport being one of them, and that will increase the protections that are in place for that and other sectors as well, such as the energy sector, telecommunications, and the financial sector. So those important tools are being studied right now and would be relevant in the transportation sector.
Thank you very much for those responses, Minister, and to the officials with you today. Minister, you stated in your opening remarks that Public Safety Canada does not review provincial procurement decisions. I'm wondering if you could tell us, from the perspective of your department and the public servants who work in service of our country, would it be feasible, would it be legal for the federal government to intrude on provincial jurisdiction by having that kind of involvement in what are ultimately, under our federal system, provincial decision-making?
Right now, the mandate to undertake such reviews is within the Investment Canada Act, and that is an area where we routinely review the circumstances of each transaction, and we comment on it. It is essentially led by Industry Canada, but Public Safety has a very important role. If there are security concerns, we can extend the time of those reviews, and we can come back with a wholesome response that will enable the government to make a decision accordingly, to block a transaction, to ask for wind down of an entity, a range of options that's available, including mitigation, which happens in many cases where we try to mitigate any impacts on national security if there are some reasons to believe that there could be some opening. So we attempt to mitigate cases where we can.
Okay. Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Greaves. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelo-Duval.
Mr. Barcelo-Duval, 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. A point of clarification. You explained that there was no security review for the contract granted for the BC Ferries. For BC Ferries, BC Ferries is a British Columbian authority, but the Infrastructure Bank is a federal institution. About $1 billion were granted, so there's no oversight, no national security oversight that's made when it comes to investing in that kind of situation.
As I indicated, so merci pour la question, Monsieur.
Thank you for the question.
Let me just say that the Investment Canada Act is the vehicle by which we can review transactions that are of concern. They're mandated, they're very strict in scope, and it is a referral that we get from Industry Canada. What in this situation, the Infrastructure Bank is an arm's length entity of the government. There is no direct link between the Infrastructure Bank and Canadian review of procurement. It is there in order to leverage and allow jurisdictions such as provinces and territories as well as municipalities to leverage their dollars.
Donc vous confirmez un peu ce que...
So you're confirming what I said. All investment decisions made by the Canada Infrastructure Bank does not need a security review undertaken by your department, even if it is decided that an investment should be made with Iran or North Korea, so the CIB could invest in North Korea. I find that rather strange, given that this is federal money that was invested in the program. It's a federal entity. The former CIB, head of the CIB, is close to the Prime Minister. We know that sometimes there is a bit of too much friendliness between former CIB heads and the Prime Minister.
With respect to countries like Korea and North Korea and China, they're not countries that we do business with. We don't have diplomatic relations with them. They're not necessarily part of our trading bloc, and there's no reliance on trade with either one of those countries. So those scenarios are frankly absurd.
Well,
but I would
je vous pose la
suggest...
question parce que...
I ask you this question because you said that there is no security review when the bank makes investments. So you're saying it won't happen, but hypothetically, nothing's stopping it from happening. And honestly, Minister, I don't think that we should be entering agreements with China blindly. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any, but at the end of the day, I also find it concerning to learn that there is no oversight, security oversight, with arm's length Crown Corporation decisions. Don't you find that worrying?
So we go back to the procurement itself, which was undertaken by the province, and I'm going to use example of Quebec as illustrative. So if, for example, we undertake a review of a procurement that's undertaken by the province of Quebec or the government of Quebec, I would think that there would be a bit of an outrage. It is, we are different levels of government, and in this instance,
Mon intention, c'était pas que vous
My intention isn't for you to step on provincial toes, and you know that you're trying to provoke us by saying that, because of course I would never want to see federal institutions block an investment made by the government of Quebec. But here we're talking about the investments made by the CIB. We're not talking about BC investments. We're talking about the investment from the federal CIB. And so I don't see how you'd be able to say no, given the current circumstances. It seems that logically there should be some kind of oversight. I find that concerning. In any case, perhaps another question. At one point, was the fact that the CIB, was the fact that it was going to make an investment, was it raised with your office, or were you just unaware of it?
Well, CIB makes its decisions independently of government. They report through the government, but they are, in all means, they're independent. It's like the Business Development Bank of Canada, for example. They're
mais la transaction, à quel moment?
At what point were you made aware of the transaction? Did someone raise a red flag at one point, or did you learn it through the media, or did you learn it through this committee?
Well, let me just maybe ask Mr. Bilodeau to answer that question.
So the department was made aware sometime towards the end of April, early May, that the BC Ferries was going to or had selected a Chinese. Oh, pardon, excusez-moi, je vais me changer en français.
So I'm going to switch to French. Sorry, it's automatic for me to speak English. But end of April, early May, we learned that the province of British Columbia had made a decision to purchase these ships. And in May, June, we were in communication with them. I can't say when the minister was made aware, but that's when the department itself was made aware. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Next, we'll go to Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. So, Minister, is this on? Okay. It's a new system. To me, it seems a bit of a cop-out to say this was a provincial procurement decision. I mean, obviously, these are not just hulls. These are floating IT systems with all sorts of capabilities. Is that not a matter of national security concern?
Look, essentially, this was a decision made by the government of British Columbia. They are able to make these decisions. This is when vehicles do come into Canada, vessels, they need to be in compliance with Canadian laws, and that is an expectation of anyone bringing transportation vehicles of sorts into Canada. There's regulations in Canada that dictates range of issues, and that is what our regulatory process does. But in terms of a review from a security perspective, it's not something that is required or routine, and this, in my opinion, was somewhat of a routine exercise by the government of British Columbia.
This is a Chinese state-owned corporation. We know, there's been issues with Chinese foreign interference, not just politically, but economically. That didn't raise any alarm bells at Public Safety Canada.
Well, I would say that the matter came into I guess the public domain sometime in late June. I took the office, I think, sometimes in mid-May, so I was made aware of it. It was after the fact the procurement was completed, and in any event, there was no mechanism for us to be able to undertake such a review, and it is, again, the prerogative of the government of British Columbia to be able to undertake a procurement of this sort.
There's no mechanism for Public Safety Canada to undertake a review in this circumstance. Okay, so if we accept that, and I don't think that we do, is there any effort to change the procedures? I mean, this is obviously something of concern. We're bringing this to your attention now. You've now been the minister for I guess 9 months. Is this something you're going to look at going forward?
Look, I look forward to the report of this committee. And I know you've been studying this for a while, so I look forward to recommendations from this committee, and we will respond to it accordingly.
So okay. So it's the province's fault. Now we'll wait for the committee. It's our responsibility. I mean, the former minister.
Sir, I would suggest that you're studying this for a reason, right? And if that reason is to have constructive assistance in changing policy and changing laws, then that is the purpose. And I would, have to yield and respect this process. And as I said, I'm looking forward to recommendations that may stem from here.
So when the previous Minister of Transport on June 18th wrote to you, asking your department to have some level of review on this, you ignored that since June 18th now?
Well, I would say that we had no authority to undertake that review.
Okay. So matters of national
it's
security.
It's a post facto review. That is not something that we're able to do.
That's okay. So it's passing the buck again. This is a matter of national security, and we know we have a foreign. It's a company that's owned by a foreign government that there's certainly been questions about in the past, and there's no accountability, there's no responsibility, there's no, especially when the alarm bells have been raised by people that you sat at the cabinet table with for that period of time. Who was the Minister of Transport?
I'm here to answer your questions. So I don't know if there's a question there.
Okay. So then other critical pieces of federal infrastructure. I mean, obviously there's going to be many, whether it's in the transport sector or other sectors, there's going to be a lot of investment into critical infrastructure. That's in the budget. Is there going to be a process where if, and again, this particular company or other companies that are state-run companies from China, is that going to be reviewed in any way? Like, I mean, I understand the Investment Canada Act, but I mean, what other responsibilities is there at national public security that you head that should be undertaken?
All the major projects that are going through the review process, there is a security component, and colleagues here can speak to that if you wish. I think we're out of time.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Muse. Next, we'll go to Ms. Wien. Ms. Wien, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, thank you for joining us today to have this important conversation on BC Ferries. As my colleague did note, several of our close NATO allies, including the Netherlands, Sweden, and France, have also engaged in offshore shipbuilding procurement projects with the same company that BC Ferries used to do their ferry procurement. Could you tell me a little bit about how public safety assesses potential risks associated with foreign-built vessels, especially when similar procurement decisions are being made by Canada's trusted security partners?
Great. Let me just ask Mr. Bilodeau to maybe shed some light into that.
Thank you very much, and maybe Ms. Lloyd will be able to supplement Chair on this. Obviously, exchanges with our allies is a key component of not just the intelligence community, but public safety as well, and understanding the landscape. My understanding is that part of the procurement process from BC Ferries was to understand the procurements in other jurisdictions. But we, without getting into specific details, obviously, of intelligence, we use information from all around the world to inform our decision making and our advice to government in terms of different risks, just generally speaking, not necessarily in this situation. And understanding those risks is a key component of our analysis, whether it's in the Investment Canada Act or, as the Minister highlighted, in supporting work that's undertaken by the Major Projects Office.
Thanks very much. And I wondered, Ms. Lloyd, if you could expand a little bit on whether or not, given your position at CSIS, if there are any concerns that you have identified with BC Ferries and this particular procurement.
I'm not sure if it's on there. Thank you through the chair. Thank you very much. What I perhaps will start with to say to the committee is that our underlying assessments of the risks have not changed. And I think the pragmatic and principled approach of this government means that national security and economic security are at the core of that approach. So as I mentioned earlier, we are constantly collecting intelligence relevant to economic security threats, including foreign interference or espionage or cyber, and constantly, as Mr. Bilodeau said, producing intelligence and information to inform the government. And our job at this point is to make sure that they are navigating those partnerships with that informed perspective. As it relates to these particular ferries, our role at this point, after the procurement decision has been taken, is to be available to our stakeholders, the province or BC Ferries, should they have concerns, and to make sure that they are equipped, as the member referenced, to understand the various risks in engaging with a state-owned enterprise in this particular context. So what that would look like is making sure that they are equipped with tools prior to traveling to a country, prior to engaging with different entities, so they understand what foreign interference looks like, and be extra confident that they understand how to report to the national security agencies, CSIS, the RCMP, and the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, any concerns in those engagements.
Thank you. That's really helpful context as I'm learning more about this part of the work. Minister, one of the things that's been really clear through the process of the study is that establishing the clarity around the roles and responsibility for each jurisdiction is important, especially around the role of procurement. And so to clarify, what I've learned is that BC Ferries operates independently from the federal government, meaning that there's no direct federal involvement when it comes to the procurement and the contracting of these ferries. And so tell me a little bit about what the role of the federal government and public safety do play in stepping in to support here.
So in areas, particularly when business investments are made, there are certain provisions in the that will require under the Investment Canada Act that will require a review. We routinely review. In fact, the first set of review is undertaken by the Industry Canada, and then from there it comes to us. So if there are security concerns, then we will be able to undertake the review. Oftentimes it is either we approve it or we have mitigation that is recommended, and then Industry Canada would write in some mitigation in the approval, or it will be denied, and certain times there may be a wind down of the operation. That may be sought by us.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Ms. Wien. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole, 2 minutes et demie.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Minister, you talked about the fact that there are independent entities that make independent decisions, so there's no security review. Another example, Via Rail will have to decide who will build its next trains to replace its aging fleet. If it wants to do business with a Chinese or a Russian entity, it's their business. You have nothing to say about it?
What I will suggest is that we now have a Buy Canada mandate. This is something that was announced several weeks ago.
But that doesn't apply for replacing Via Rail's trains. That's what your government mentioned, and that's what was publicly broadcast in the media, unless you're telling us today that you have the intention to change things to make sure that the trains are actually built in Quebec or Canada, which would be great for us.
Well, if you'll allow me to continue, essentially we have a Buy Canada mandate across government, and we want to, at every opportunity, to be able to buy Canadian, especially when federal dollars, procurement dollars are at work. We want our economy to be built, Quebec and Canadian economy.
Je viens de vous dire que ça s'applique pas pour cet approvisionnement-là.
I've just said that based on your own criteria, it doesn't apply to this procurement. You haven't responded to the question. If Via Rail were to decide to buy trains from a potentially dangerous country, would you have a say in the matter?
Well, federal procurements are different, and maybe Mr. Bilodeau, if you can respond.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Effectivement, je pense qu'on a une situation qui est un peu différente.
Thank you. Indeed, we're in a bit of a unique situation because this would be a federal purchase, and our colleagues of the Department of Transport also have access to information from CSIS, for example. The context is slightly different. The work that Ms. Lloyden is doing with her team and with other intelligence services is to give intelligence and information to make enlightened decisions. It's much easier to support this kind of information in a federal purchase context. You don't want to apply that to the CIB? Thank you, Mr. Basile-Duval, end of your time.
Next, we have Mr. Gunn. Mr. Gunn, welcome to committee. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. Minister, first question to you. Do you believe China's communist regime poses a security threat to Canada?
What I would say, Mr. Gunn, is that Canada is in a moment where we are expanding trade. We are, as I said earlier, as the Prime Minister has said, we will meet the countries where they're at, not where we want them to be. With respect to China,
are they a security threat or no?
With respect to China, we do have an MOU that speaks to to address the issues around safety and security in both countries.
Thank you, Minister. I'll be a bit more direct. Do you have evidence that the communist regime in Beijing has previously targeted Canadian institutions or strategic assets with cyber attacks and other forms of espionage?
Yes, there have been reports of that in the past. Some of them have been documented.
I mean, you're the Minister of Public Safety. Do you have evidence?
There's definitely documented evidence of that, yes.
Do you have evidence that the communist regime in Beijing has targeted the House of Commons and the private information of parliamentarians?
What I will say is that for the purpose of this particular transaction, this was a procurement that was undertaken by the province of British Columbia.
So you don't deny that then?
Well, look, there's been a number of incidents. I'm not sure we're here to litigate every one of those. What I would say is that there is a need right now for Canada to ensure that we are able to go clear-eyed and ensure that we have a track that deals with safety and security. Then that is something that we're doing.
Minister, I appreciate your openness and honesty. I just want to make sure we're on the record that, because I think it's a position that you can hold, that you think it's reasonable to use taxpayer money to help subsidize the procurement of critically important transportation infrastructure from a regime currently engaged in espionage and other cyber crimes against Canada. Do you think that is reasonable? So that's what's happening.
So what I would say is that, as I said a number of times, the procurement was undertaken by the government of British Columbia, and this is
right. But it is taxpayer money. It was federal taxpayer.
This is within their purview. This is the Canada Infrastructure Bank, although was a funder in this.
Do you regret the taxpayer money was used to bankroll the purchase?
The procurement itself was undertaken by British Columbia.
Do you regret the federal tax money was used to help subsidize, to bankroll the purchase? Through the infrastructure bank?
What I would suggest is the government of British Columbia made a decision on this procurement. The funding did go from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. However, the decision itself is on the government of British Columbia.
Okay, fair enough. Are you concerned as the Minister of Public Safety that we are subsidizing the shipbuilding infrastructure of an adversarial nation?
What I would say, Mr. Gunn, is that our desire, Prime Minister's desire, and we made it very clear as a government, is that we want procurement to be done in Canada. We want to have Canadian companies who can compete for these very important infrastructure purchases, and that is precisely what we're doing with our defense infrastructure.
Would you have preferred if those ships were built here in Canada?
Absolutely. I would say
why then did we bankroll?
Well,
why did we bankroll?
If I may, I would say that every Canadian would say that we would prefer to have our infrastructure dollars be spent in Canada. That is not always the reality. So what I would suggest is, in this particular case, the procurement was done by the government of British Columbia. I'm going to give them the benefit to say that it was done in an open, transparent, and fair manner, and they have chosen this particular vendor.
Just so we're on the same page, because this is an important procurement. Obviously, there's public public safety concerns, security concerns for Canadians. Are we on the same page that China is a communist country?
Well, I mean, I think it's factually yes.
Okay, that's perfect. Do you agree that President Xi is a dictator?
What I would suggest is that we can go around the world and put tags on individual leaders.
We certainly can.
That is not what I'm here to do. What I'm here to advise this committee is that the process by which we undertake these procurements in this particular case was by the government of British Columbia.
Have you done a security review?
We talked about it before you came here, Mr. Gunn. So I
just want to get it on record.
You may want to review the transcript. Because,
I found it hard to believe. I was told that we hadn't done it, but is that true?
Well, I can ask Mr. Bilodeau to answer that question. We've already answered that, but if you want this to be repeated, of course, we can do that.
Thank you, Chair. There was no security review done of the actual BC, the ferries that BC purchased. When we got involved in late April, early May, the decision to purchase the ferries had already been made.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn, and merci, Mr. Bilodeau. Next, we'll go to Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Chair and Minister. Great to see you here. And to Ms. Lloyd and Mr. Bilodeau, thank you also for being here. I have a couple of questions, but I'll start with Ms. Lloyd. Does the procurement of these vessels pose a national security threat to Canada? I just want to be clear in terms of the answer. Yes, no? From your perspective, from your expertise, where you work, and Mr. Bilodeau, I'll ask you to chime in as well. To be clear with Canadians, from your perspective, from your intelligence, from your work, can you talk to us about the yes, no, in terms does it pose that threat to Canadian citizens?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question and the opportunity to give a clearer response. So not having reviewed the procurement and not being in a position to understand the technologies that will be on the actual vessels, because that has not been our role so far, my current understanding is that there are no national security threats that would raise concern in terms of these are not connected vessels, and they do not pose the types of things that we would be concerned about in terms of data sovereignty, for example, or private information that could be collected through the use of those ferries of Canadian citizens. So at this point, there is nothing to flag to the committee.
Okay, so that's a no. Mr. Bilodeau, would you like to chime in, sir?
The only thing I would add is that there is legislation before Parliament on protecting critical infrastructure in federally regulated infrastructure, for example, in transport, that would require those operators to have certain protections in place, and so that's a piece of legislation that would help in supporting the protection from a cyber perspective.
Okay. Thank you very much, both of you, for answering that question very succinctly for those in the room and those watching at home. Minister, I want to go to you next. Given that the CIB operates at arm's length and reports to, I believe, the infrastructure minister, I wonder if you can confirm if public safety, that it doesn't direct its lending decisions. I think this is important in terms of making the distinction in terms of the divisions of powers in terms of province and feds.
It does not. But what I do want to just offer, Mr. Kellaway, is that we are quite involved with the Major Projects Office, and I think it'll be instructive for this community to understand a bit more of that work, and maybe I can ask Mr. Bilodeau to kind of elaborate on what we're doing with the Major Projects Office.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, the Major Projects Office obviously has a number of projects that it's considering or that might consider in the future. Part of the legislation includes a national security review. We have been supporting, along with our partners at CSIS, RCMP, CSC, and others, conducting reviews of some of the projects and informing or providing advice on national security concerns and feeding in that into the decision making.
Thank you again for another succinct answer. Mr. Minister, going back to you now. I'm wondering, do you think that conflating provincial procurement decisions with national security authorities, it runs the risk of confusion about the scope of Canadian law?
Well, I would suggest that for the federal government to be involved in procurement decisions, I think can cause a great deal of turbulence amongst our federation. Provinces have their own policies in place. They have their own systems in place. They are subject to regulation if their vessels are regulated by the federal government, so they are subject to regulation. However, with respect to security review, that is not something that is now within any of the provincial or territorial mandates or processes.
Thank you, and I have less than a minute left. So I'm going to take this time for one last question. And it goes back to you again, Minister. Would you agree that effective national security policy requires steady and evidence-based leadership grounded in law rather than reactionary decision-making?
Absolutely. And look, I think we've learned a lot from the Investment Canada Act process in terms of how to undertake these decisions. It's based on the available evidence, based on interviews, based on other research, and we have a robust system in place when it comes to federal investments that are subject to the Investment Canada Act.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Kellaway, and thank you, Minister. And on behalf of all members of this committee, I would like to thank you as well as your officials for your time today and your testimony on this very important study. Colleagues, we're going to suspend for a couple minutes as we set up for the next round of witnesses. The meeting is suspended to the call of the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, December 11th, 2025, the committee is resuming its study of supporting, diversifying, and modernizing Quebec and Canada's ports. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for the second half of today's meeting. We have from Prince Rupert Port Authority, Ms. Catherine Bamford, Vice President, Business Development, welcome, as well as Kevin Morias, Director, Government and External Relations. Thank you, sir. Welcome. From the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, we have Mr. Peter Exoda, President and Chief Executive Officer, joining us by video conference. Welcome to you, sir. La Ville de...
And from the Ville de Matane, we have Eddie Métivier, who is Mayor. Welcome.
We'll start with our... yes, sir?
Yeah, if I could just quickly take the floor.
Is this a point of order?
Yes, a quick point of order, Mr. Chair. I just resuming back to, or at least going back to the Minister of Public Safety's appearance, I just will note that Conservatives are very disappointed that instead of continuing on with another rotation, as is typically the habit of committees, that a 45-minute appearance by a minister that we have been seeking to have for over 160 days is not satisfactory. I want to make sure that this practice is stamped out. Obviously, if there is further names needed to come forward, but at this committee, when we have issues of national security, 45 minutes is simply not enough.
So noted. Thank you very much, Mr. Albus, and the chair will ensure to ask for names for all of the boxes here on the sheet of questioners to make sure that if we do have additional time, all members will be afforded that time. Thank you for raising that, sir. We'll begin with our first opening remarks, and for that, I'll turn the floor over to you, Ms. Bamford. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, and good evening. I would like to thank the committee for inviting us to speak about port diversification and modernization. I'd like to acknowledge that the Port of Prince Rupert operates on the traditional land of the Smaliak-speaking and Jimsian people. Located in northern British Columbia, Prince Rupert is one of Canada's strategic trade gateways, anchoring the fastest shipping route to Asia-Pacific markets. The Prince Rupert Port Authority gets its mandate from the Canada Marine Act, which outlines that port authorities must be commercially oriented and manage strategic port assets in the national interest. We take this mandate seriously by implementing development plans that have grown the Port of Prince Rupert from one single-use dry bulk terminal to a diverse commodity ecosystem and Canada's third largest port by value of trade. The Port of Prince Rupert handles $60 billion of trade annually and provides access to Asia-Pacific markets for Western Canadian resource sectors such as energy, agriculture, forestry, mining, and petrochemicals. It also enables imports to Ontario and Quebec and supports the manufacturing and consumer sectors, including the auto industry. Canada's reputation as a reliable trading partner depends on the fluidity, efficiency, and reliability of its national supply chains. Canada's economic sovereignty depends on diversifying trade and ensuring greater supply chain resiliency. To achieve these goals and meet the needs of Canadian shippers, Canada needs to focus on 3 priorities: building more trade-enabling infrastructure, enhancing trade corridor capacity, and providing an efficient regulatory environment so investors can have confidence in timely decisions. In Prince Rupert, our focus has been on these priorities. In collaboration with port industry and Indigenous partners, we are currently delivering a $3 billion development plan that will double trade volumes to 50 million tons over the next decade. Several projects will become operational in the next 6 to 18 months that will help position Canada as an energy superpower, improve supply chain resiliency, and enable speed to market for diverse exports. For example, building on the success of the AltaGas and Pembina energy terminals, the $1.4 billion Ridley Island energy export facility, known as REEF, will be a common user multi-liquid bulk terminal that will drastically increase trade capacity for Canadian energy exports such as propane and butane. Prior to the commissioning of energy terminals in Prince Rupert, Canadian propane was landlocked and producers could only sell to oversaturated U.S. markets at discounted rates. Today, Canadian propane represents 14% of South Korea's total imports, 11% of Japan's total imports, and 6% of China's total imports, and these numbers will grow when the REEF terminal is commissioned in the next 12 months. The port is also growing the container ecosystem anchored by the Fairview Container Terminal operated by Dubai Ports World. With 1.6 million containers of annual terminal capacity in place, our focus is now on building complementary container transload facilities. Instead of sending back empty containers to Asia, the $750 million CAN export project operated by Raymont Logistics will fill 400,000 containers with Canadian exports, such as plastic resin from Dow's $10 billion Path to Zero project in Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta. But we are not stopping here. We are planning to become a 100 million ton gateway by 2050, ensuring that Canada has 2 major West Coast gateways, providing greater resiliency, efficiency, and optionality for Canadian exporters. As this committee considers recommendations to modernize Canadian ports, we invite you to help us execute the next phase of Prince Rupert's development. First, establish a consistent and efficient project regulatory process. A one-window review process can be implemented by enabling the Canada Marine Act to allow port authorities to coordinate and efficiently manage port development review processes with required federal regulators. And second, ensure federal investment is directed to expand corridor capacity and trade-enabling infrastructure. In Prince Rupert, land preparation for greenfield projects costs between $1 million and $2 million per acre. Previous investments through the National Trade Corridors Fund helped us to prepare land and build infrastructure to host our current developments. Please consider these priorities in your deliberations, and we thank you for taking the time to hear our remarks, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bamford. Next, we'll go to Mr. Exada. Mr. Exada, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, sir. Mr. Exada, I would just ask that you kindly unmute yourself so that we can hear your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to say thank you for giving us the privilege of participating in the committee discussion today. I also want to acknowledge that I'm participating virtually from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples and extend my thanks to them. These are extraordinary times for Canada that have been discussed at length in the trade press. Trade rules have been upended, and Canadians are feeling anxious. I think I speak on behalf of all Canadians when I say thank you to the committee for your work and thank you to government for rising to the occasion with a bold agenda to double Canadian exports to non-U.S. markets over the next 10 years. It's going to take a Team Canada approach to make more stuff like metals and minerals, wood and energy products, agri-foods, machinery and equipment, to sell more stuff to customers who want and need what Canada makes, especially in the Indo-Pacific region where 50% of global GDP will reside by 2040. And importantly, for port authorities to move more stuff to where it needs to go reliably. The good news, the Port of Vancouver, Canada's largest port, is right at the nexus of this activity. Today, we handle $350 billion worth of Canada's trade every year, whether it's retail products from Ontario, Manitoba canola, Saskatchewan potash, Alberta oil, BC lumber, and other products. You name it, there's a good chance we move it, and 80% of those products are already headed to non-U.S. markets. Decades of investment, about $9 billion of investment has occurred in this corridor over the last 15 years or so. That has resulted in about a 75% increase in trade volume through the Port of Vancouver to international markets. Interestingly, doubling that is about another 50% in the next 10 years. The point is, we've done this before, we can do it again. We need to fully unleash the power of Canada's ports as an engine of Canada's trade diversification strategy, and we're pleased to see this committee advancing a study of Canada's ports to inform and galvanize policy choices to help deliver the Government of Canada's bold trade agenda. We see, like my colleagues from Prince Rupert, 3 big opportunities for Canada's ports. One, we need to make permitting more efficient. As a country, we need to be able to get nation-building, trade-enabling infrastructure projects across the finish line, like our Roberts Bank Terminal 2 project that will build new industrial land and expand container trade capacity by $100 billion each year. And dredging the second Narrows in Burnaby, BC, that will let tankers leave from the Trans Mountain Westridge Terminal, passing under the bridge at full capacity instead of 70%, as is the case today. New levers, including through the Major Projects Office, will help, but broader regulatory modernization, including permitting, is the biggest opportunity. In an ideal world, the MPO will lead us to make systemic changes to our regulatory frameworks, like expanding Port Authority's permitting powers. In Vancouver, for example, in recent years, we've permitted substantive projects such as the Centerm Expansion Project and G3's new grain terminal, each of those projects worth about $500 million. We run through thorough environmental assessment processes, including robust consultation with First Nations, and critically, we deliver timely decisions, 91% within our targets, which is pivotal to attracting investment. So I say empower port authorities to do more for Canada on permitting. We have the experience, the skills, and the track record. 2, we need to invest in port and rail infrastructure, including supporting roads, bridges, and tunnels. Canada's export growth opportunities center on the bulk sector, grain, potash, steelmaking coal, and this hinges on rail capacity and reliability. Over the past 15 years, as I mentioned, the Canadian government has helped invest in 2 major waves of rail supporting infrastructure in this gateway, through the Asia-Pacific Gateway and Corridor and the National Trade Corridor Fund. To double exports, we will need to do more in this space. We need to prioritize supply chain infrastructure investments and other capacity building initiatives, including last mile infrastructure. We look forward to the government's swift launch of the new $5 billion Trade Corridor Diversification Fund announced in Budget 2025, and hope that projects supporting Canada's largest international trade gateway will be seriously considered for funding support. It's not about just adding capacity, it's about making networks more efficient. Here we must work together to keep adopting new digital tools and tech to help supply chain partners optimize and share data to move products faster, safer, and more sustainably. We have had tremendous success with some of these initiatives, like our active vessel traffic management program in Vancouver. 3rd, addressing labor stability. Frequent labor disruptions are a blemish on our reputation as a trading partner. Acting on the recommendations of the Industrial Inquiry Commission on West Coast ports is a must, and we need to act swiftly. Our global customers are watching. Performance is the key. Lastly, and it goes without saying, to be successful, we must be bold, ambitious, and nimble, but equally important, we must renew our commitment to doing things right, to minimize environmental impacts, and to work closely with Indigenous communities. On this, Canada is a leader, and the Port of Vancouver is a leader, having secured the consent of 27 nations to build the Roberts Bank Terminal 2 project, just to name one example. Let's keep making how we do things our competitive advantage in this country. In closing, I know Canada is ready to get to work, and so are we at the Port of Vancouver. Let's go. Let's fully unleash the power of our nation's ports. Let's show the world we're open for business and deliver for Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Monsieur le maire de Matane, la parole.
Mayor of Matane, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. My name is Eddy Métivier. I'm an engineer. I've been in the industrial sector for nearly 30 years, and I've been the mayor of the city of Matane since 2021. I'd like to thank you, Chair, and the members of the Standing Committee for giving me the opportunity to present this brief to you. The city of Matane is located 400 kilometers east of Quebec City on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River. It has a population of 14,316 people. Our city, with its strong maritime tradition, has recently experienced significant economic growth in its industrial port area. However, as mayor, whilst I'm very encouraged by this new economic boom, I'm also greatly concerned that it is fragile due to the dilapidated state of our seaport, which was built in the late 1960s by the Canadian government. The challenge is that the commercial wharf, built around 1967 by Transport Canada, is at the end of its useful life, 2033, and that's soon. And if no maritime incident involving a ship occurs there, it'll reach 2033. The quay deck is greatly weakened so that its load-bearing capacity is only 14 kPa instead of the minimum standard, which is 50 kPa. Lots of transport opportunities due to the weakness of the deck, which is in very poor condition. There's eroded concrete, exposed reinforcing bars, there's severe corrosion of the deck and piles due to the highly corrosive marine environment. The condition of the port thus poses a very high risk to our economy and our businesses, about 80 businesses, in fact, that are closely linked to it. There are 1,140 direct and indirect jobs. About a tenth of Matane works directly or indirectly for the port or with the port. In GDP terms, it's $167 million per year and a tax revenue of $20.5 million a year. We also serve major export flows, 311,000 tons a year, which is about two-thirds of the tonnage. Two-thirds of the tonnage, rather, goes to Europe and Asia. It's an essential logistical link for the lower St. Lawrence, for the Gaspé area, the North Shore regions. Today, it's one of the ports operated by the SPBSG, which is our local port authority. The Port of Matane is a deep-water multipurpose port at the heart of an industrial port zone recognized by Quebec's Department of the Economy and Industry. It's the only one in the lower St. Lawrence connecting sea, road, and rail with a Class 1 rail connection, including a CN rail ferry, and located near the industrial park. I'm here before you today because I'm concerned that the government of Quebec is delaying authorizing our port authority to move forward, despite the fact that the port's refurbishment is part of the Quebec government's infrastructure renewal plan. Despite my political representations to ministers, despite the funds provided by the Canadian government, which are no longer sufficient to meet the actual needs, including the sequential construction of the two wharves, storage areas, and the upgrading of services. This amount is underestimated by the scope of the work to be done due to the extreme deterioration of the port, post-pandemic inflation of construction costs. So the money was dispersed in 2020. There's now a lack of vision, lack of investment and maintenance of this port when it belonged to the Canadian government, which sought to divest itself of it. This amount is also unrealistic with regards to climate change. Breakwater needs to be raised because of rising water levels. It would have been good practice for the Canadian government to have made a serious assessment of the port's repair and modernization needs, to have carried out the work in collaboration with Quebec before selling the port to our province, and to have allocated a certain amount of capital to facilitate its future maintenance. So our requests are as follows. Considering the current context of a tariff war, considering the Canadian government's desire to diversify our economy towards new markets outside of America, considering that the government of Quebec is delaying, in its economic context, authorizing the sequential work of two wharves at the port, as Mayor of Matane, I request that the Canadian government sit down again with the province of Quebec to readjust its contribution to the Port of Matane project so that Quebec, with your cooperation, can green light our port authority so we can move forward with the port refurbishment projects in 2 stages with the new wharves or docks, if you will. So this is an opportunity to be seized for the benefit of Canada's collective prosperity. Thank you.
Merci à vous, Monsieur le Maire.
Well, thank you, Mayor.
Questioning with Mr. Albus. Mr. Albus, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses that are here. Mr. Chair, originally Ellis Ross was hoping to come in as the Member of Parliament for Northern BC, particularly because Prince Rupert Port Authority is in his area. Unfortunately, there was a death at one of the First Nation communities, and he can't be with us. But his constituents are quite concerned, so he sent me a list of questions that are on their minds. So I'll go right to the Port Authority. Can you confirm that Prince Rupert Port Authority is responsible for discharging the Crown's duty to consult and accommodate First Nation communities whose interests are affected by developments in the Port of Prince Rupert, yes or no?
Just want to make sure it's on. Is it on? Just make sure. Perfect. Yes, it is. The Prince Rupert Port Authority's jurisdictional boundaries include 6 Indigenous communities.
Okay, that's fine there. You are aware, aren't you, that the honor of the Crown is a fundamental constitutional principle that requires governments and their agents, such as the Prince Rupert Port Authority, to act with honor, fairness, and integrity in their dealings with Indigenous people, yes or no?
Our role continues to be very focused on ensuring the appropriate duty of consultation. We do that on behalf of the Crown. We do that in collaboration with different Crown entities like Transport Canada, Environment Canada, and other relevant regulators involved.
Are you familiar with the Metlakatla First Nation?
Yes, we are. They're one of our 6 First Nations.
Metlakatla's traditional territory includes the lands and waters within the boundaries of the Port of Prince Rupert. Is that correct?
They are one of the Six Nations, correct?
PRPA has a duty to consult and accommodate them on decisions that affect Metlakatla's interests. Is that correct, sir?
We go through a consultation process to assess accommodation. Those consultation processes look at social, social, traditional use impacts, and we work through a process related to that project on the lands.
Isn't it true that the Prince Rupert Port Authority failed to inform Metlakatla that it had granted extraordinary contractual rights to a Dutch oil and gas company for handling bulk liquid products in the Port of Prince Rupert?
You want this one?
No. The consultation process involves, for any project, looks at traditional use and other sort of social impacts related to the Six Nations.
Is it true the port failed to inform this First Nation community, sir? Yes or no?
The question that you've raised is around commercial agreements. We at the Prince Rupert Port Authority focus on long-term terminal operating agreements that incentivize investment and performance while ensuring the gateway remains open and accessible to diverse shippers. PRPA continues to support growth and diversification aspirations.
Okay, it was a simple yes or no question. You are aware, aren't you, that the PRPA granted those contractual rights in 2015 and that those extraordinary contractual rights are now held by Vopak Development Canada Incorporated and AltaGas Limited, correct? That's a yes or no.
I will say this then. Given that this matters before the courts, it'd be inappropriate to comment any further than that.
Well, it doesn't sound like you are being transparent with this committee. Are you aware that Vopak, AltaGas, and PRPA has refused to disclose to the Metlakatla the contractual terms that PRPA and Vopak agreed to in 2015?
Those are commercial agreements. We have commercial agreements with many partners in the region. And more importantly,
it is a yes or no question.
They are commercial agreements that I would probably say that, so we do not disclose commercial agreements as they are confidential, sensitive.
You do realize that you're at a parliamentary committee, sir, and I've asked you a direct question.
And I would state again that commercial agreements are confidential.
Okay, please note, Mr. Chair, that we have the port is not being cooperative. I'll try this. You'll agree, won't you, that the Metlakatla is entitled to know what specific contractual rights Vopak and AltaGas hold in their traditional territory?
I would ask then that, is that a matter of the duty of consultation that is put forward as part of the Crown, and it's not to my understanding. I will circle back with our legal to better understand that and maybe take that with you offline, if that helps.
Well, I don't think you need to take it with me offline, sir. Again, these are not my constituents. However, the committee has asked you a question, and I think that you can submit it to the clerk and to the chair. And I do appreciate that there are, you have a business to run, but I also believe that in this House, we have questions to ask. And if you're a government's agent, we expect to have accountability, whether it be from the government itself or from their agent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albus. Next, we'll go to Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. It's delightful to have 2 West Coast ports before the committee today. Absolutely thrilled. My first question is for Mr. Exotta online. Thank you for joining us, sir. Glad that one of us is in BC at the moment. But my question for you is, as the leader of Canada's largest port, can you give us a bit of a sketch, perhaps, of the scale of economic impact that the Port of Vancouver, or I should say the Vancouver-Fraser Port Authority, has for the surrounding region in southern British Columbia? You can be as broad or as specific as you'd like, but it would be helpful if you could put in context the role that the port plays in the Western Canadian economy and also in the government's strategy of diversifying our trade exports.
I think thanks for the question. And my prepared remarks had reference to $350 billion worth of trade. Those are numbers that are difficult to, I think, kind of digest in some cases. But fully 50% of the containers in and out of this country come through this one port. 70% of what we do through the Port of Vancouver are the bulk commodities that I mentioned: potash, agricultural products, coal, sulfur, and others. And this all generates about 110,000 jobs across the country, and 50,000 of which are within the region around the Lower Mainland, providing employment at port facilities, but also the transportation, transloading, and other activities that support ports. Canada has a disproportionate dependence on very few ports on the West Coast, that is, as the ports that are represented here today. And it's why we are very passionate about the importance of us making timely investments in the supply chain to allow us to continue to play that important role and restore what I believe is confidence in the Canadian supply chain in terms of being able to get our stuff to you, whoever you are, in whatever part of the world you're interested in shipping it to.
In that context, we've seen reports recently about Canadian companies looking to American ports in order to meet their export needs. Can you please elaborate, Mr. Exoda, on how the proposed Roberts Bank Terminal 2 expansion project will help increase our trading partners and increase the capacity of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority to grow in the future?
So the Roberts Bank Terminal 2 project has been contemplated for quite some time, and it was part of a strategy that was developed many years ago that was in part intended to depressurize Burrard Inlet and create a place for Canada's trade to continue to grow outside of the more populated parts of the region. Roberts Bank Terminal 2 is really a manifestation and a further step in that strategy. It is a landmass about 350 acres. That would be created to host a container terminal, one part of the port's business. But the knock-on effect of that is to other parts of the port's jurisdiction, where it would depressurize, as I said, Burrard Inlet to allow other commodities to continue to grow. The other investments that I mentioned, and my colleagues from Prince Rupert also mentioned, similar types of things, are about making sure that first and last mile performance. Keep in mind, many of the networks approaching port facilities, not just on the West Coast, but all ports, were designed and implemented many years ago. Of course, there's been a lot of urban development around them. Continued investment in the supply chain to make sure that the economies that are created by new facilities, whether it's mining or agricultural facilities in the prairies, those economies in transportation are realized when you get to port. So longer sidings, more sidings, reduction in impact of level road crossings, loading grain in the rain are examples of optimizations that are intended to allow us to remain competitive as a nation. And again, on the West Coast, it's Prince Rupert and Vancouver that are the key to making that happen and restoring confidence, so that investments in productive capacity in other parts of the country are done with confidence that those commodities can be shipped to their final destination reliably and competitively.
Great. Thank you for that response. In my remaining time, a question for Ms. Bamford. Mr. Moraes, thank you for being with us today. As you're aware, Budget 2025 included an announcement of a $5 billion Trade Diversification Corridors Fund. Can you please describe how this fund, once the Budget Implementation Act is passed, will support the Prince Rupert Port Authority in your plans to expand your operations and remain this critical economic outpost on the BC coast, and in particular for the northern part of our province?
Thank you for the question. We'll spend some time talking about the current fund and translate that into what the future fund could look like. The National Trade Corridors Fund has been an absolutely vital tool for the Port of Prince Rupert. NTCF funding was a catalyst for the CanExport project, which is the 400,000 TEU facility. Zanardi Bridge expansion, South Cane Import Logistics Park, and Trigon Terminal 2 berth. With roughly $225 million in funding, these investments helped the Prince Rupert Port Authority develop port land and common user infrastructure that has enabled $3 billion in new infrastructure, representing 7.5% of the overall investment. That investment drew significant other investment to the gateway. So we look forward to working with the Government of Canada when the new Trade Diversification Corridors Fund opens to utilize federal investment into developing more land that will incentivize, incentivize new private sector investment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greaves, and thank you, Ms. Bamford. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelo-Duval.
Mr. Barcelo-Duval, 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. I will be focusing myself on the port of Matane. It's the Quebec port that we're studying today. Mayor Métivier, you briefly mentioned the issues you have. Significant renovations are necessary in a port that was that the federal government divested itself from. When it was handed over to Quebec, it was 68.8 million for Gros-Kékouna, Matane, Rimouski, and another port, for a total of 4. How much money do you think is needed to renovate the port of Matane? In 2022, the estimation was $81 million, which is far less than what is required. There is dock number 1, but we need dock number 2 that could be built first. If we want to repair dock number 1, which is coming to the end of its useful life in 2033, then Matane's economy would grind to a halt for at least 3 to 4 years whilst the works are being done, which is impossible. So we need a second perpendicular dock to the first one, and once that is built, then we can start renovating dock number 1, which will allow us to have more storage area and will allow us to get extra tonnage. We're losing opportunities because of the current capacity will go from 300 to 500,000 tons every year. This could also create new jobs. There are opportunities that are being lost given the fragile nature of the current dock. What would happen if you don't get this funding? Does that jeopardize the port in general? Answer, absolutely. As I explained earlier, almost 10% of Matane's population work directly or indirectly for the port, 10% of the population of 14,000. 2033 is just around the corner. We need significant projects. We need many months and years to actually conduct this work, and so this project needs to happen. If not, it's not looking good for Matane and its industries. We have a German factory that just opened in Matane, 240 new jobs. François-Philippe Champagne came to Matane, so Canada helped in bringing this factory here, which is a complete game changer for us. We also have the Marman wind farm, which is building 8,000 megawatts in wind energy in our area. There's a new company, Habitation Montcalton, that seeks to build highly prefabricated housing units in the current housing crisis. And so much of this depends on the port, which exports these prefabricated housing units. There are many examples. We send silica through our port to Port Daniel. It's 80,000 tons, which would take 5 trucks to go to Port Daniel in New Brunswick for storage. So we're also reducing greenhouse gas emissions by having fewer trucks on the roads. Question. So it's essential for the region's economy, but also for our general economy. We had the Minister for Transport this week, who mentioned that it's important to use existing infrastructure. We need to make the most of current infrastructure because it's cheaper than creating new infrastructure. The question I have, given that context, where there's a dock that was poorly maintained for years, do you believe that you inherited a poisoned gift? Because the dock's end of useful life is just around the corner. Had the right investments been made by the federal government, would we be in the same situation? Answer. That's why I'm asking for the Government of Canada to sit with the Government of Quebec once again and the Lower St. Lawrence Gaspé Port authorities, because the port did not receive enough TLC from the government for many years. We cannot renovate the current dock. It's too deteriorated. Corrosion is too advanced, and so we need a new perpendicular dock. So you understand that this means extra costs. What we would love to see is Quebec sitting with Canada sitting with Quebec as they should have in the first place, so that they can renovate and modernize the current dock. And then it could invest in maintenance through an envelope of money instead of just devolving a port with no maintenance. 2033 is coming up quickly. What is most important is that we have a tonnage of 310,000 tons. Sorry, just a quick interruption. I think that we got conned by this by the federal government. The federal government just kind of threw it at us, bargain prices, but at the end of the day, the Port of Metan is going to be paying the price. It's going to be footing the bill. It's going to be suffering from the consequences because the investments were not made. Answer: absolutely. And that's if everything goes well. If we have an accident, if a ship hits the dock, then the dock, which is already very fragile, will put jobs at risk before 2033. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Barcelo-Duval.
We'll go to Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. So in March of 2023, this committee conducted a national study on large port infrastructure. In fact, we toured a number of ports across the country, including Prince Rupert. And there were 12 recommendations from that report in terms of competitiveness, streamlining approvals, strengthening financial flexibility. The Government of Canada responded to that report in May of 2023, indicating that port infrastructure was a priority. So I guess my question is this: that was 3 years ago, and yet we're still hearing the same concerns, and we heard them at the last meeting as well, about faster approvals, greater flexibility, removing the structural bottlenecks. And so I guess of those 12 recommendations, and since the government has declared ports a priority, what tangible federal reforms have you actually seen implemented? And I'll ask that both to the Prince Rupert Port Authority as well as the Vancouver Port Authority, since we're talking about a significant portion of our national trade.
Well, as I mentioned, the National Trade Corridors Fund has been absolutely critical to the success of the Port of Prince Rupert. The idea that we could catalyze investment, draw investment, by receiving $225 million in funding. And with that investment, we are now enabling $3 billion in new infrastructure. This is a spectacular opportunity to take this forward into the next Trade Corridors Diversification Fund. That would be one example.
Vancouver Port Authority?
Sure, I will echo essentially what Catherine has said. The National Trade Corridors Fund and programs like that are critical, both from the perspective of delivery of infrastructure at Tidewater, but these supporting pieces of infrastructure in the context of what has happened. We're in the process right now of delivering an overpass in the city of Burnaby, adjacent to Vancouver. That overpass allowed the significant increase in rail capacity because of the elimination of a level crossing that has increased the capacity to North Vancouver, where there are several bulk terminals, by about 10%. So these are projects that are not insignificant in terms of their scale. They take time to put in place, but the planning and permitting for those, as we've mentioned previously, is also part of the challenge. So we look forward to being able to avail ourselves of some of the funding available under the new program in a targeted way to keep that momentum going. As I said previously, the Vancouver Port Authority and Port of Vancouver has grown tremendously on the backs of some of these investments, and what we're talking about in terms of doubling trade is entirely within reach. It's about us getting busy and making it more streamlined in terms of execution.
Okay. So I would suggest that, I mean, obviously, as both of you indicated in your opening statements you've been doing significant work, and some of that is on you. But what specifically has been done from a federal perspective 3 years on from these recommendations? Do you have the agility that you need from a governance perspective? Do you have the flexibility in terms of financial tools? We heard that constantly in that particular study, in that report, that was addressed in that was insufficiently addressed in the failed ports bill, Bill C-33, which died on the order paper when this Prime Minister called an election. But you compete globally, and you've made reference to that, and you're competing with U.S. West Coast ports. And so, you've talked about let's go, let's show up and let's be open for business. Let's ensure that regulatory certainty. But what's been done in 3 years to actually make that happen, and what needs to be done so that that actually is not something we're talking about 3 years from now and still not accomplished?
I'll start it off, and I'm happy to have my colleagues contribute. One of the main and most significant changes that I've seen is really since the current government took over is the establishment of the Major Project Office. We see that as both a pathway to improving on several fronts the issues that we've identified, but it's also a profound statement about Canada's recognition of some of the challenges that are associated with getting major projects done in this country, and we're looking forward to working with the Major Projects Office on both the specific projects that we have in mind, like RBT2, but also guiding them on some of the broader issues that we've mentioned in our prepared remarks earlier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Exata, and thank you, Mr. Muse. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Lauzon. À vous la parole, 5 minutes.
Mr. Lauzon, 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. My questions will be asked in French. I'll begin with a common question for all two authorities in one city. You all agreed that capacity needs to be increased, that maintenance needs to be improved. We need to do better with what we have, but we also need more resources. That's what I've heard from the three of you. You have the opportunity to tell this committee today how we can increase our capacity in a judicious way so that it has a minimum impact on the environment. Tell us of direct and indirect jobs that this would create, and talk to us about the importance of the supply chain. If we start let's start with Ms. Bamford. You could also add the fact that you have a 58-kilometer corridor. You have a lot of business with Asia. 80% of exports no longer go to the States. So could you tell us more about this so we can understand the situation well?
Thank you for the question. I think I'm going to concentrate on regulatory barriers and the potential for permitting certainty, permitting changes, permitting consistency, as that will lift capacity through speed to market. So what I'd like to say there is a significant need for regulatory agility. Canada's current project review and permitting system for port lands involves excessive regulatory red tape due to overlapping and duplicated roles among federal departments. This has created a fragmented consultation process, redundant approvals, and unpredictable timelines that has put investment and trade diversification infrastructure at risk. As the federal land manager mandated to enable Canadian trade, the Prince Rupert Port Authority acts as the sole federal entity responsible for ensuring the port's timely and sustainable development to meet our shared economic priorities. We need a modern framework that grants port authorities more autonomy to respond to rapid changes in changing supply chain needs. The Prince Rupert Port Authority has put forward actionable recommendations to create a one-window, one-review process that will create a more efficient and accountable federal administration process for port development. These recommendations will reduce regulatory duplication, ensure meaningful consultation, and expedite the development of new infrastructure across Canadian ports. This one project, one review approach will eliminate jurisdictional duplication and set firm statutory timelines for reviews without compromising environmental standards, which is the key. Thank you.
Merci. Avant de passer. Thank you. before we move on to the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, I would like to turn to Mr. Métivier. In the same question, now I don't know if you want me to repeat the question, I'm sure you understood the question the first time. Could you talk to us a bit more about regulations and laws regarding import, exports, and talk to us about direct and indirect jobs? You talked about it briefly, as well as the importance of this for regions to have such a port in Matan. Thank you very much for the question. With regards to the port of Matan, we are currently losing business because we are at 28% of a dock's normal capacity when it comes to load bearing. That's why we need our second dock, the perpendicular one. That would mean that the end-of-life Dock 1 would continue to operate whilst we build Dock 2. And so these two docks would allow us to increase our tonnage, and we'll finally be able to meet the needs of shipbuilders. We'll go from 300,000 tons to about 500,000 tons, 500,000 tons, in fact, to meet demand. We'll create 400 new direct and indirect jobs every single year on top of the 1,100 that we have. We'll go beyond 10% of Matan's population that work with the port. We'll add $54 million to Quebec's GDP. We'll add $67 million to $167 million that we currently have, and there'll be an extra $9 million of tax revenue on top of the $20.5 million today. So we want to depend less. The government wants to rely less on America. We want to export more to Asia and Europe, and that's why we want to move forward with this project. Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. Next, we have Mr. Berthelot-Duval. 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I will continue with the Mayor of Matan. The current situation is rather deplorable, is it not? And you're not the only ones to experience that kind of situation. It's the case elsewhere in Quebec, in Verchères, in my riding, in the Gaspé, on the Madeleine Islands. In Quebec, there was a dock that just crumbled a month ago, which is indicative of a lack of federal investment in infrastructure. What I would like to ask is that the government has announced the implementation of a new fund, a new diversification fund for trade and port trade, which is a new version of the NTCF. These funds are often used for major projects, rather sexy projects, if I may, with great announcements, but we often see that our regions are often the forgotten ones, and smaller projects are often the forgotten ones when it comes to which projects are selected. The criteria have yet to be announced. The Port of Quebec came to our committee, Quebec City came to our committee and advocated for the inclusion of current infrastructure. Are there any criteria that could be used, that could be taken into account before they are published, that would be of use to your region? Yes, this is an important criteria. We contribute to our province and country, and this would be a major change for us. We already export to Europe, we already export to Asia, and so the government needs to better encourage our region. We have Coast Guard vessels, we have rail in Matan, we have the RCMP as well in Matan, so there are many opportunities that we're losing out on because of the fragility of the dock. If we lose our dock, we lose our heritage, we lose our capacity to take part in our provinces and countries' economy. We can't just take this lying down. It's unacceptable. There needs to be a place for regional ports, for all ports, all down the St. Lawrence. There are major ports that are important, of course, but we need bridges with regions, and that's an essential part. Smaller ports, regional ports also need to be taken into account in the program. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Mr. Albus, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with Mr. Exada, Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Sir, The World Bank has a index every year, and I'm sure you know this doesn't come to a surprise. Unfortunately, your report is not as productive as we all might like. Minister McKinnon came here and told us that that he felt that getting your port to be more efficient is going to be a key component of the government's strategy to increase and diversify our trade. I'd like to hear about how you feel you can, first of all, where you feel that you are at, and what things the government tangibly can do, what we can recommend in our report that would help you in that.
Thanks for the question, MP Alves. The World Bank report is something that ports up and down the West Coast look at. What I would say is this. The Port of Vancouver in 2025 had record volumes in potash, grain, oil, autos, and yes, even containers. 3 consecutive years of growth in containers. Our market share of containers on the West Coast has continued to be very, very stable, notwithstanding a period of time over the last 2 years where we had reliability challenges, both weather-related and those that have been self-induced. Heretofore mentioned the labor situation. Our recommendation to the Minister of Transport has been to pay close attention to this, the labor environment, and to look at means by which we might signal internationally and, in fact, deliver more reliability going forward. That'll be a key condition for attracting investment and, of course, delivering reliable service to the importers and exporters in this country. One of the other things that Minister McKinnon said was that we should do more with what we have, and I would point to one of the projects that I mentioned previously. That is the Centerm Expansion Project, where we increased the land mass of the project, of the terminal, by 15%, 15%, and increased its capacity by 60%, 60. That is what we need to be doing. These investments that many of my colleagues have talked about is about increasing the density on the available footprint that we have and using the scarce resource that we have, that being the land and rail capacity to the West Coast, as efficiently as possible. I believe if we continue to make investments at both Tidewater and in the first and last mile improvements that I mentioned previously, we will continue to grow this gateway, and we will continue on a path to delivering the doubling that our Prime Minister has talked about.
Now, when it comes to weather-related events, and look, I understand that there's been a number of challenges, and all ports have some of those from time to time. But particularly when I mentioned Anchorage to the minister, he did not seem to think this is an issue. I've heard that often it's been the port having to encourage, when weather has held back these large cargo ships, that it's a bit of the Wild West, that there's no central authority that actually will come in unless it's the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard doesn't actually set where Anchorage is at. It seems that it's the Wild West. What do you think needs to happen? Does the port need to be given that authority, or should the government be consulting and trying to figure out how best? Because if we're going to have more ships coming in, then to me that makes sense that we need to have a place to put them when weather-related events keep them from docking.
So the use of anchorages within Burrard Inlet and Vancouver's jurisdiction, as well as those in the southern Gulf Islands, an area where there's another 33 anchorages, is something that's under the administrative control of the Port Authority. In other words, we administer it, but we don't control those locations. They're outside of our jurisdiction. I will say that weather does have an impact on the utilization of those anchorages, but I would point out to the fact that, and I mentioned this in my prepared remarks, something called active vessel traffic management, as well as our centralized scheduling system, has put us in a position to much better predict when those events will occur. And I'm pleased to say that over the last 2 years, the utilization of the anchorages in the southern Gulf Islands in particular has not exceeded 50% for any period of time, and the number of concerns that have been expressed by residents in that area has dramatically dropped since we implemented this system. It's an example of where technology, aided by, in some cases, regulation, but certainly supported by the federal government, can be very helpful in us addressing what are legitimate concerns expressed by residents in those areas. We are a port and a port region, so there will be vessels and locations to put them from time to time will become important. We think that investment in technology and better communications can be very, very helpful in addressing concerns, and have been certainly over the last 2 to 3 years.
Thank you very much. And finally for today, we'll go to Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses from British Columbia and Quebec. Really good discussion on supply chain, and to MP Basso-Deval, I really liked your question actually around smaller ports and how they fit into the mix here, or how will they fit into the mix. But I want to pivot a bit, if I can, to recruiting and retaining labor. And so we all understand that ports across Canada often face unique and acute challenges when it comes to their own operations. So I'm assuming that what faces ports in Quebec or Port of Vancouver or the Prince Rupert Port, rather, they're different. And they're different in terms of scope and things of that nature. So I'll cut to the chase. What can government do to help ports, and I'll start with Prince Rupert and then we'll go to the screen to our guests there, to help ports in terms of recruitment and retention when it comes to labor and specific needs that ports need? And we'll start with Prince Rupert, please.
Thank you for the question, and appreciate being here, of course, with our West Coast colleagues in Vancouver. Prince Rupert is very unique as one of Canada's major trade gateways. We are located in a small northern community in BC with a town of 12,000 people. So from a labor availability standpoint, our concern is always going to be about, do we have enough labor supply locally in the community? As Catherine had mentioned about the $3 billion new construction coming online, that's going to bring on hundreds of new jobs locally. And so what we're really focused on is working with our local municipal partners, industry partners on how community infrastructure, housing, water infrastructure, water treatment can be implemented so that we can recruit and retain labor in the community. One of the benefits, I will say, from the government of Canada was investments into local water infrastructure that has helped that's being implemented right now to the city of Prince Rupert, and going forward, investments into something like water treatment so that we have clean drinking water in the community would be of vital importance.
Ms. Banford, do you have anything to add?
Nothing.
Okay. Maybe we'll go to our witnesses online in terms of your own port. What can the government of Canada do to support you in terms of recruitment and retention when it comes to your own ports? Please.
I'll jump in from Vancouver, sir. Sure. I would say the aforementioned recommendation around reliability is one that will continue to attract investment in the gateway, thus creating greater opportunity for employment. So that would be fundamental to that. There's an ongoing conversation around advancing the productivity in the supply chain, particularly at the waterfront. I think training and development funding for adoption of new technologies is important. And then fundamentally in the waterfront and again in broader parts of the supply chain, there's probably not as much diversity that we would like. And I think that training and finding pathways to increase greater diversity across the workforce is something that government can and should turn their attention to.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Métivier, would you like to comment, sir?
Oui, c'est sûr que la création.
Yes, the job creation, renovating the port would bring new jobs, but these people with new jobs have partners that can also work in the town. So there's direct and indirect jobs. So it's always good to invest in our ports. But regions find it hard to bring in labor. Our ports are very important because they can be a contingency for larger ports if the larger ports have an issue.
Mr. Chair, how much time? So let's go. There used to be a game show, not a game show, but a show on CBC, Nova Scotia called Reach for the Top between high schools. You probably had something similar where they would say, okay, some short snappers and we'll go around the horn. So maybe if we can start here with Prince Rupert. You talked about water, wastewater. Can you, for the purposes of a report here, can you give us, is that a recommendation for further investments? Are there other things that we could be doing? And if we can quickly just, so we can go around to the witnesses that are online. So just very quickly.
We would say that the top recommendation is water treatment, fundamentally, for the local community, and the local municipality would also agree with that as well.
Okay, thank you. The folks on the screen? Monsieur Metivier?
Pardon, pouvez-vous répéter?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
A recommendation that you would like to see in the report that will support the Government of Canada in supporting you in terms of retention and recruitment.
Ce que j'explique.
What I was saying, we should invest in the port because it would allow us to bring in quality labor, a quality workforce, people with partners who will get other jobs elsewhere in Matane. And it's difficult to bring people normally to regions, so it would be great to have a recommendation for investments because it has an impact not only on the port but on the other parts of the town, city, or other means of transport.
And Port of Vancouver for the win.
So we are very fortunate here in Vancouver in terms of our ability to attract and retain labor. I will come back to our one of our primary recommendations, which is greater certainty of investment. That's going to actually serve Canada's broad ambition, but will also create greater employment in the region and in the supply chain.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kellaway. And on behalf of all members of this committee, I would like to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today and contributing to this very important study. Colleagues, this meeting is adjourned. Look forward to seeing you after the break.
Thank you.